Okay. Good evening, everyone. So nice to have all of you here today. This evening, we're going to be continuing with our series on issues of Jewish theology. We've been studying the writings of the late Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and what we've been showing, and I imagine this is starting to come across, is showing how he did something really quite remarkable. He was at one time a staunch traditionalist, an Orthodox Jew, but at the same time was deeply in touch with the modern mind, or shall I say perhaps the Western modern mind. And what he sought to do, and we'll see in just another example of that this evening, was to find a way and enable Orthodox Judaism to have a theology that does two things. One, what would sit with someone who had been reared or had adopted kind of Western ideology, and at the same time to see that there is inspiration and there is a vision that comes from the Jewish tradition, from a traditional Jewish vision that is relevant, contemporary, and necessary for this modern Western world. And in that respect, he did something quite similar to what Rambam had sought to do with reference to philosophy of Aristotle. And we mentioned in the first lecture the way that relates perhaps in contemporary terms to issues of science and so forth. And while Rabbi Sacks addressed science, he really was more interested in ideology. And he looked at the way that Western people think about certain ideas, how they relate to faith, how they relate to notions of justice and morality, and really tried to see in Judaism, in a traditional Judaism, that those same values, those same moralities, in fact, exist within a traditional Jewish approach, and in fact, perhaps are even espoused and are really promoted from a traditional Jewish teaching. Now, in order to do that, he searched through traditional Jewish sources, and at times dismissed some, while of course adopting others within the tradition. But as we've seen, he then kind of takes them a bit further. He kind of pushes them a bit beyond the way that they'd been understood before, and really, I would say, kind of expanded or kind of enlarged the way that those sources could be understood. And in doing so, he was able to create almost a new Jewish ideology rooted in traditional Jewish sources, but in harmony with Western liberal society. Now, that's not to say that he accepted everything going on. He actually had quite a lot of critique of what he saw happening in the Western world, particularly the focus on the individual versus the collective and so forth. And so it wasn't just that, anything that was popular in the West, he was adopting, far from it. But in terms of like core values, core moral values, that he saw that was in concert with Judaism, but that Judaism actually had quite a lot to say about how a society can be built on those core values in a way which is actually sustainable and is in harmony and ultimately is part of this Jewish vision of a society. And so in that respect, he really did two things. He made, that Judaism was palatable with the Western mind, but at the same time also then demonstrated how Judaism actually had quite a lot to say and to teach, and why it continues to be so relevant. And as we're going to see in tonight's lecture, he knew that he was pushing the envelope. He often just kind of teaches and almost kind of like, of course, this is what the Jewish source means. Of course, like he kind of presents it like, obviously that, this is the Jewish view. But as we'll see today, he was aware that he was saying things that Jewish thinkers had not quite said before him, but at the same time felt confident that what he was doing was not, in opposition to the tradition, but it was perhaps just kind of understanding it a bit better, or kind of framing it or formulating it in a slightly different way. And so in that way was deeply traditional. And as we'll see, he doesn't kind of come out of nowhere. He comes out of a way of thinking that had been developing over the past 2 centuries. It hadn't been perhaps what had become the dominant ideology within the Orthodox community, but has appeared throughout and was evolving. And he was kind of just taking it a bit further. And in doing so, he really created a Western modern Orthodox ideology to enable a traditional Jewish life to fit into the modern world and to actually be really essential to it. And so I think I mentioned this last week, I've heard many people say that he saved Orthodoxy for them. He really showed why Orthodoxy was so vital and so important and so moral and so just at the same time. So we're going to see that tonight in what is a particularly challenging subject for the Western liberal mind, that of the notion of the chosen people. Very appropriate, as I mentioned, this whole series is kind of a lead up to Pesach, which is a holiday that really focuses on Jewish faith, God's intervention in the world and the creation of the Jewish people. And so this is appropriate when you think about Passover, the fact that God redeemed us from slavery and so forth. Really this idea that the Jews were elected, as it were, by God. And obviously in many circles, that is seen as racist, as superiority, and so forth. And so the way that Rabbi Sacks looks at it, as you would imagine, is not in that way. And so he does this incredible thing where he, at one point, shows why Judaism, even with the notion of chosen people, is not have a superiority complex, but at the same time is crucially important, essential to the future of the world. And he kind of does those at the very same time, as we'll see. So he's really quite amazing what he did. So let's just start. That's kind of all intro. Let's start by looking at the origin of this idea of the chosen people. Okay, so here we have the pasuk, the verse in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Perek 7, pasuk 6, and it says the following. It says, Ki am kadosh ata lashem elokecha, right? For you are a holy nation to the Lord your God. Becha bachar Hashem elokecha, you, God has chosen, liot lo la'am segula, to be for him a treasured nation, mikol amim, from amongst all of the nations asher al pnei adama, that are upon the face of the earth. And so here, Moshe is telling the people, right, that you are a holy people. God has chosen you. You are a treasured nation, right? And so you have here, this is just one example. This idea appears in the Torah as well as in later biblical sources as well. This idea that the Jewish people are chosen and that they are a treasure and that they are precious to God. And so Jewish thinkers have, of course, reflected on this to understand, what exactly does this mean, right? How are we to understand why it is that God has chosen the Jewish people? And of course, we can talk about the story of Avraham. It's unclear in the Torah itself why Avraham is even selected. It's only through the Midrash, through the rabbinic teachings, that we talk about the stories, that Avraham recognized God while everyone else didn't recognize God. But the Torah itself doesn't make that point. And so it's kind of challenging to understand, why are we chosen? What does it mean to be chosen? What is its purpose? And so forth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with the one view among traditional sources that, well, you'll see it takes it in a way which is not the way that Rabbi Sacks will take it, but certainly is one stream of thought within the Jewish tradition. Okay, so here we have a picture of a statue in Spain of Yehuda Halevi, the Kuzari, who's again one of the kind of well-known Jewish poets and thinkers in medieval Spain. And he wrote a work, Kuzari, which is an exploration of Jewish beliefs. And he writes over here the following. He says, "The law was given to us because he had led us out of Egypt and remained attached to us because we are the pick of mankind." Right? And so the view of Yehuda Halevi was that the reason that the Jewish people were chosen is because we're better, because the Jewish people are the best, right? The cream of the crop, right? And that's why the Jewish people were chosen, right? And so from his view, being chosen is, right, this sense of superiority, that there is something better about the Jews. And I'm not going to go into too great detail about this, but you find this ideology appearing throughout. One of the most kind of famous and I would say offensive articulations of this you find within a Kabbalistic work written by the first Lubavitch Rebbe in the Tanya. Tanya is a very well-known work. It's beautiful work in many ways, except for something it says in the first chapter. In the first chapter, it says that Jewish people, that there's like a certain kind of soul that all of mankind has, and then there's the soul of the Jews, right? And that the soul of the Jews is like altogether different than the soul of the rest of mankind. And he really, sets it up as there really is this like somehow like superiority, like even the souls of Jews is different or better or has more capacity than the souls of non-Jews. So you kind of find this ideology, right? This idea appearing, in medieval times and in early modern times, and I dare say in modern times as well. You'll find some Jews who believe this. What we're going to see, though, is that is not the only traditional Jewish view. In fact, many Jewish thinkers rejected this idea, and Rabbi Sacks really held on to that and says that is the core Jewish value. That what we find here in the Kuzari and in the Tanya is not accurate. It's in the tradition, but it's not. It is not the reign supreme. And perhaps one of the early sources that kind of start to differentiate is, as you might guess it, right, within Rambam, Maimonides. And he writes the following in his Mishneh Torah, his important halachic work. He says the following. He says, non-Jews who accept the 7 Noahide commandments are considered righteous Gentiles and have a share in the world to come. And so he wants to make it very clear that, Olam Haba, the world to come, spiritual attainment is not the only, under the of the Jews, but in fact, all of mankind can achieve spiritual heights, whether Jew or Gentile, right? Ultimately, it's about living an appropriate life. For Jews, it means following 613 laws. For Gentiles, it means following the core 7 laws of Noah, right? Core moral and just society. And so that's fine, right? You see with Rambam, he's focusing on a different way of saying it, and saying that no, there is no one group has has a monopoly on spiritual attainment, right? It's open to all peoples of the world. How we get there is different. Jews have their route and non-Jews have their route, but everyone can ultimately get to that place. But let's move forward then, because we're going to see that Rabbi Sacks really embraces more of this way of thinking of Rambam, of Maimonides. Okay, and so here we're going to go through a series of things that Rabbi Sacks said. And so Rabbi Sacks said the following. This was in a lecture that he gave on the 8th of February, 2001, and it appears on Rabbi Sacks's organization's website, where you can see the whole lecture, but we'll pick up some bits of it. And these ideas then appeared in his books as well. But I had access to the online, so I pulled it from there. So it says the following. He says, anyway, we do not believe you have to be Jewish to go to heaven, right? That's what Rambam just said. The great of the nations of the world, right? The righteous among the Gentiles, the righteous, the pious, have a share also. In other words, Judaism is not an exclusive religion. It leaves space for others. That last point there we're going to get to. We'll kind of see how Rabbi Sacks expands on that idea. But I want to show you that he didn't kind of come to this just leaping from Rambam, but there's really been thinkers throughout the modern age that have advanced this mentality that sees, that Jews are not any better, that are not kind of like fundamentally have a greater ability than non-Jews. So here we have from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who is a great Jewish leader of the German, shall we say, modern Orthodox community in the 19th century, and a great defender of orthodoxy against reform, but of an orthodoxy which was modern as well. And so he writes in actually one of the first things he wrote a book called The 19 Letters, which was one of the earliest books that he wrote. It was a defense of traditional Judaism, and again, responding to questions, what does traditional Judaism really believe, and so forth. And so he wrote the following. He says, nor was there any genetic superiority ascribed to Abraham and his descendants. To the contrary, the common descent of all humanity from Adam and Eve precludes any racial differentiation, as understood by the Mishnah. Furthermore, Adam was created alone for the sake of peace among men, that one might not say to his fellow, my father was greater than yours, right? And so Rav Hirsch says that Judaism does not believe in superiority. It does not think that Abraham and his descendants are somehow genetically better than other people. In fact, the Torah doesn't begin with Avraham, right? This is maybe one of the answers to the question, why does the Torah begin with creation? It should just begin with Avraham or begin with the giving of the Torah. Why does it begin with creation of man? It begins with the creation of man to say, we're all the same. We're all fundamentally the same, right? Is the way that the Talmud expresses it. No person can say to the other person, "Oh, I'm better than you." What do you mean? We all have the same origin. You go back far enough, we all descend, from the same person. So, that idea you find, being embraced, right, in the writings of Rav Hirsch, right? Much more of a not a superiority, right? The idea that we fundamentally are all the same. Jews are not any better because they descend from Avraham. And should you think that that's only kind of a Western kind of rationalist approach, I'm going to show you that it even appears within some Kabbalistic thinkers as well. Also, perhaps quite tolerant ones. But different from what you found in the Chabad Hasidic work. Here you find something a bit different. And this is from Rav Kook. Rav Kook was from a Hasidic background. He was a Kabbalist in many of his writings. He actually lived in Britain for a number of years during the First World War. He was rabbi of the Das, which at that time was Brick Lane. Now it's a midrasa, but he served as the rabbi there before going back to Israel. Of course, was the chief rabbi, British Mandate Palestine. And he writes the following. He says, with respect to unique individuals, we do not recognize a difference between nations, and that a non-Jew who, he's quoting, a non-Jew occupies himself in the Torah is like a high priest, right? So he quotes this other tradition that says, no, everyone has the ability to achieve greatness. Everyone can achieve spiritual heights, right? So really rejecting this notion that you find in the Kuzari, in Yehuda Halevi, that says that no, all of mankind is equal. No one's better than anybody else. We all have the same, capacity for spiritual attainment. End of story. And so Rabbi Sacks is clearly drawing on a long tradition, right, that sees equality between peoples. Okay, but all of that is really just, I would say, step one. That's really kind of just the beginning, because obviously what it does, it rejects one interpretation of the chosen people, right? So essentially, chosen people does not mean that Jews are the pick of mankind, right? The Jews are better than anybody else, but it does beg the question then, well, what does the chosen people mean? Why were we chosen? Just by show, are you guys hearing me clearly? Is it coming through okay? Yeah, okay, fine. Right, so the question is so what exactly is the meaning then? Why are we chosen? And what does it mean to be chosen, right? So that becomes the question. So if you say we're better than everyone else, then fine, that already answers that question. But if you reject that idea, and Rambam rejected that, Rav Hirsch, Rav Kook, right, Rabbi Sacks all rejected that idea. So the question is, so then what does it mean to be chosen? Why, in fact, were we chosen? What purpose is there in that? So that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so I'm just going to pause the share for a second. Sorry. Sorry, my computer's giving me a little trouble. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you something else in a second. But does anybody have any questions so far?
I think it's not really a question, but I just want to get this clear.
Yes, please.
I know Rabbi Sacks draws on primary sources and things like that, and obviously on the prophet. I think it's the prophet Malachi who said, "Don't we all have one father?" So how come we can get great people like Yehuda Halevi and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because I'm not a Lubavitch, but he's a great person. I studied a little bit of Tanya. How can they then go against this sort of idea of the chosen, of the Am Segula? Because I don't think most Jews see it as that we're better. Even as a child, I used to say to my non-Jewish friends, used to taught me, we're not better, but we have a Torah that we have a burden we have to carry. As a young child, I used to say that. So I'm very surprised that these great people like the Kuzari and Yehuda Halevi could think that way. So it was racist in a way, their thoughts. That's my question, really.
Flora, it shows what a strong moral core you have, that you can't even imagine that there could be Jews who interpret chosen people as being superior. Well, there you have it.
Well,
yeah. Okay. All right. Let's carry on. I think let's move on. I'm going to show you this video from Rabbi Sacks. Okay, so let's put this up over here. Okay, so here we're going to watch an interview that Rabbi Sacks had in 2010.
We say we are a chosen people, Asher bocha banu mikol ha'amim, who chose us from all other nations. And that's really quite a difficult thing to say because, after all, aren't we all one humanity? Didn't God create every human being in his image? Didn't he, after the flood, make a covenant with all humanity? So what does it mean to be chosen? And I think it means something like this. God makes us all different. And he took one person, Abraham, and then one couple, Abraham and Sarah, who became a family, who became a tribe, who became a collection of tribes, who became the Jewish people, and said, be different, to teach the world the dignity of difference. And you can be different from others and still be special. You can be different from others and still be loved by God, because God loves diversity. That's why he created such an interesting universe. He could have created one language. Well, there was just one at Babel. He said, no, I want lots of languages. Today, there are 6,000 languages spoken throughout the world. There are 250 different kinds of leaf, 3 million different forms of life. Every human being, even identical twins, are different because God loves difference. And he gave us, the world, the Jewish people, who really are different, and said, you see these people who are different, I love them, I chose them. Because difference does not mean you are hated, reviled, treated an outsider. Most people do that to people who are different. God says, difference is what I love. And it is that message that we, the Jewish people, were placed down here on earth to make real in people's lives, people's consciousness, and in history, the people who dared to be different.
Okay, so Rabbi Sacks here does something amazing. He says, why are we chosen? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Start playing the next video. Sorry about that. Started playing his TED Talk. Okay. So what this raises, right, is a completely different way of thinking of why were we chosen, right? So, and we'll see in his writings, we'll look at some of what he wrote to understand it a little bit better. But what he says is that the reason we are chosen is essentially for the purpose of rejecting universalism, or it's for the purpose of rejecting the idea of homogeneity, right? The idea that everything should be homogeneous, right? That everything should be the same. That by selecting the Jewish people, and the Jewish people not having a mission to convert the whole world to Judaism, what God is saying is, I don't want everyone to be the same. My goal isn't that everything should just be one, right? But I like the fact that there are differences in this world, that there is diversity. And so why were we chosen? So that God could say that difference is good. That difference is good. That's the purpose. The Jewish people represent this idea to the world that God does not want everybody to be the same. Not everyone is supposed to be Jewish. Not everyone should be Muslim. Not everyone should be Christian, right? The idea is the world is full of diversity and difference, and that's the way God wants it. And the way God teaches that is through the existence of the Jewish people, a people who refuses to just be like everyone else, right? Through a people that is always different, right? And there's that notion, right? Am levadad yishkon, right? They are a nation that dwells alone or apart. And it's that idea that by being different, we show the world that difference is okay. It's okay to be different. It's okay for not everybody to be the same. And Rabbi Sacks says that is an incredibly important idea, an incredibly important message for the world that embraces diversity, that embraces difference. And he says God taught the world that through choosing the Jewish people. Okay. We're going to look at a text now before we unpack that to see the way that he kind of then plays that out, right? Because obviously it raises all kinds of questions about, so how do we fit? What does it mean to be Jewish? Our beliefs versus other people's beliefs. So let's just take a look at what else he says on this issue. So I'm going to go back to my screen from before. Okay. Okay. So moving on. Okay, so we're going to continue on something else, other bits that he wrote. So he says the following. He says, okay, and here let me put it a bit more radically. Again, this you're going to see here that he knows that what he's doing is no one said before. I haven't heard it said before, but here it is. Judaism, and I don't know if this is true in any other faith, but in Judaism, God is bigger than religion. If there is only one God, and there are many faiths, many paths to his presence, God is bigger than religion. I have to say that this is a very profound remark, an extremely profound and important one. And so here Rabbi Sacks put forward this idea that God is bigger than any one religion. And there are different religions in the world. And the idea is that as Jews, we should be Jews, and other people should do their way. But the point is where are we going, right? And that we're ultimately leading towards God. Now, this way of thinking got Rabbi Sacks into a bit of hot water, right? In one of his writings, where he seemed to be saying, that there's no difference between Judaism and other faiths, and that, they're all equally true. And so Rabbi Sacks had to kind of explain to say that no, Judaism, of course, is true. It's the revealed word of God. But other peoples, through their own experience, learning from Jews, have developed their own religions, and essentially just say that there's value in that. That there are different groups of people who are not Jews who have ultimately embraced the core ideas of Judaism. There's one God and so forth, and that they've created their own religions that speak perhaps to their historic experience, and there are parts of the world and so forth. And that's good. That's good. They shouldn't do what we do. Let them do their own thing. But ultimately, we're trying to get to the same source. And so his idea of kind of embracing diversity, for one thing, allowed for him to have a tolerance of other faiths and to see value in different nations doing things differently, as long as they're ultimately heading towards God. Now let's take this further. He then says, I don't believe, and this is really important. He says, because this is perhaps then speaking to Jewish people, he says, I don't believe a person secure in its own, I don't believe a people secure in its own identity need ever negate or put down anyone else's identity. I've really been fighting against what I think is a laziness of mind, which has developed over the last 100 or 200 years. And it comes in two shapes and sizes, which appear to be opposite to one another, but actually are two sides of the same coin. And so what he's going to show you over here is that he thinks that when people need to negate other people, that actually shows weakness. That shows weakness. And his ideology shows great strength. Let's take it further. He says, what are the two ideologies? He says, one is a sense of Jewish inferiority, right? One that sees Jews as less than. The other is a sense of Jewish superiority. They are both bad news. And I've been trying to explain how neither has a place in Jewish thought if we really wrestle with Jewish thought. And so here he's going against what he sees as extremism, right? Kind of a secular Judaism and a kind of fundamentalist Judaism, right? Fundamentalist Jews that say, Jews are better than everyone else, and more of a secular Judaism, which is perhaps embarrassed of the idea of chosenness and so forth, and tries to say, well, that's what we used to think. We don't think that anymore, right? And he says both of them are bad, and he sees both of them as not true to the tradition. And so how does he kind of bring it together? He says the fact that God created nefashot rabot, the fact that God created many different kinds of human beings, that tells me that somebody else has what I lack, and somebody else lacks what I have. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then, so let me just read that again. The fact that God created nefashot rabot, many different kinds of human beings, that tells me that somebody else has what I lack, and somebody else lacks what I have. And that is why our coming together in friendship generates a win-win scenario. It's good for both of us. That is why human society exists. And I wish we could understand this. So here he comes forward with a really cutting edge Jewish idea, right? This idea that says we are chosen. We are meant to be different. The reason that we are chosen, the reason that we are different, is to teach the world that difference is good, to teach the world that we shouldn't all be the same, that in fact there are different paths to God, and that those paths don't have to be the same, right? It's a rejection of, this idea that, let's force everyone to follow one religion, right? Or an idea that says, let's reject all religion. Let's all just be, one, right? Imagine a world with no religion, right? He says, that is not the truth. The truth is diversity is good. He says, that's the ideal for society to get to, and a society that has differences, respects difference, and sees the value in it. Because he says, ultimately, the idea that God has chosen us doesn't mean that the world could exist with only us. He says that's not true. We need the Greeks, and we need the British, and we need, people from, any country around the world. He says each place around the world brings something different to the table, contributes something else to society. And he says that's great strength, right? When we can feel confident enough in who we are, that we can also appreciate what some other society has to offer. And our ability to appreciate what some other society has to offer isn't taking away from what we have to offer. We have something really important to offer. We offer the world the notion of tolerance. We bring the world morality, right? We bring an appreciation, a recognition, right, of God in this world. That's huge. But, we didn't write Shakespeare. We didn't make, beautiful sculptures. And that's okay, because other people did. And what they did is amazing. And as Jews, we can love those things and we can appreciate them. They're not ours, but we can also enjoy them. We're part of the human race. We're part of this incredible world that God created, right? The Torah itself says that God turned, as he mentioned in that video that we saw, right, one language into 70, right? That God wanted there to be diversity, that's what makes the world work. If everyone does one thing, it doesn't work. It only works when you have different nations doing different things. And he says that's the ideal. That's the ideology of Judaism, because God chose us, but didn't choose us to then go get everyone else to be Jewish. And in doing that, God was teaching the world to accept diversity, And it was also teaching Jews, be proud of who you are as Jews. Be proud of what you as Jewish people have to contribute to the world and to society. But as Jews, you can also equally appreciate and enjoy what other societies have created and have brought to the world as well. Don't give up being Jewish. Judaism is really important. Judaism has a specific function in this world. You should make sure to always embrace and to, as he said, Rabbi Sacks said in other contexts, be more Jewish, not less. But ultimately, being proud of being Jewish also allows you to, in fact, be proud of what other nations, other peoples have contributed to society as well. So you can see where he's kind of gone past and gone beyond, with this idea of rejecting the idea of Jewish superiority, but taking it further than that, of not just saying that all people are, equal in the eyes of God, but therefore saying, so practically, what does that mean, right? What that means is that we can be proud of who we are while being equally proud and enjoy the contributions of other peoples as well. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they work in concert together. So what I'd like to do with you now, with the last kind of 10 minutes that we have, is to show the way that this kind of practically translates into different ways that modern Orthodox Jewish thinkers have tried to understand what is modern Orthodoxy, right? What does it mean to be modern Orthodox? And I'm going to show you that different thinkers have articulated it in different ways, but that I think Rabbi Sacks was articulating it a bit in a more, in a different way, as we'll see. So let's take a look. So what is modern Orthodoxy? So what are the classic approaches to this? Is that modern Orthodoxy is a dialectic, right? It is two different things. There's being Orthodox and there's being modern, right? They're two different things that we figure out how do they fit together. And there is a tension between those two things, right? We're Orthodox and yet we're modern, and those things are kind of in conflict with one another. And I'll show you the way that some people have articulated this. So one was an approach called Torah im derech eretz, which was Torah and the ways of the world, right? And this was an approach that embraced the idea of perhaps Judaism being a Torah Jew, but also learning a profession, learn a field of study so that you can also participate in society. Right, and this was an idea that Rav Hirsch himself, who we saw earlier, that he advanced. Right, he encouraged secular education. In fact, he taught literature in his yeshiva in addition to Jewish subjects. Right, and said that we should learn of the world. We should learn of the world. We should learn a profession. We should be able to participate in society. Right, Jews had just been allowed to participate in Germany in professions, and he said that's a good thing. That's what Judaism wants: Torah and the ways of the world, derech eretz. But dialectic, right? They're kind of two things that are different, but we can do both of those two different things. Another one was put forward. This is the mantra of Yeshiva University: Torah umada, Torah and science, right? And so this one's going a bit further, saying it's not only about getting a job, but it's also perhaps this embrace of also learning about the science of learning how the world works. And that's good too. We have Torah to teach us about, Judaism, and then we have science to learn about the world, right? And that was a phrase that Rabbi Lam, blessed memory, that he advanced. He was the head of Yeshiva University for many, many years. And so he really pushed forward that idea, which was a bit more going beyond that, which is saying you learn about the world for its own sake, not only for what you can then use it for to get a profession, right? And so he encouraged, just liberal arts education and so forth more broadly. But again, within this model, it's almost like two different things. You have Torah and you have Madda, right? There's this dialectic. And that's an idea that Rabbi Soloveitchik presented as well, that often things are a dialectic and you figure out how do two different things live together. I think what's amazing about Rabbi Sacks is he didn't see things as a dialectic. He saw that as Jews, we are part of this world. Jews are not any different in a sense than everyone else. We're different, right? But we're not like fundamentally different. We have something to contribute. Other peoples of the world have something to contribute. And we should embrace that. Probably as Jews, we can also enjoy those things. We can also be a part of those societies. And I think that idea you find has a resonance within the Spanish and Portuguese community as well, which is what I want to show you over here. So this is an approach which talks about integration, right? It's not modern is one thing, orthodoxy is something else, but it shows that these are actually integrated ideas, that a true orthodoxy is modern, that being a Torah Jew, in a sense, is telling us to be integrated, to be part of society. The objective isn't to be apart. We are different, but we're not meant to be apart. We're supposed to be part of this society while remaining as Jewish people. Okay, and so obviously Rabbi Sacks really advanced this idea. He believed that people should enjoy the world and learn from the world. I mean, he was incredibly well read. He had great friendships with people of all different faiths, and really valued what everybody had to contribute. He didn't feel dialectic. He was proud of who he was. It allowed him to enjoy and learn from everybody else. But that idea, you find, he wasn't the first British chief rabbi to have that idea. I think you very much find that idea among Rabbi Hertz. If you've ever seen the Hertz Chumash and read the wonderful articles in it that talk about how Judaism and archaeology, Judaism and science. He really was someone who was trying to figure out how does the Torah fit with what we know of the world, and really I think embraced this idea of as Jews, we're part of society. But I've often wondered, where did Rabbi Hertz get it from? So Rabbi Hertz studied to be a rabbi in America, actually, and he studied at an institution known as the Jewish Theological Seminary. Now, nowadays, the Jewish Theological Seminary is what in America they call the conservative movement. Not exactly the same as what you have in this country. Maybe kind of like Masorti, but not exactly. And so you have the conservative movement in America today. But originally, the Jewish Theological Seminary was an Orthodox institution at the time that Rabbi Hertz was there, and he was the first graduate. And the Theological Seminary was founded by a Spanish and Portuguese rabbi, Rabbi Sabato Moraes. Sabato Moraes was the rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Philadelphia. He originally was from Livorno. That's where he was raised and educated. He actually, for 5 years, ran the Sharei Tikva school here at Bevis Marks, right, in the Spanish and Portuguese. And so he was a Spanish and Portuguese Jew from Livorno, London, and then in Philadelphia. And some people have described him as, a humanist. I mean, he really was someone who, he studied the Italian literature, and he really believed in kind of the modern state of Italy, and definitely was someone who really embraced this idea of integration, right? Not opposition, not dialectic. And this idea you see then flows throughout many of the Spanish and Portuguese rabbis. You find it with Chacham Raphael Meldela, who was the Chacham here in London, also from Livorno originally, and then the Chacham in London for many years. In fact, he was one who established the Sharei Tikva school. Nowadays, it's a supplementary school, but when he was running it, it was a Jewish day school, and it had Judaic studies and general education. And he believed very strongly that was, as Jews, we should know of the world. That's just, we have a responsibility to know these things. That's just what it means. Like, it's not like Judaism is one thing and the world is something else. Judaism is part of the world, so we have to study about the world. And so that was an ideology that he very much embraced. And I would say kind of one of the earlier people that we find with that ideology as well, right, within our community was Chacham David Nieto, who was the first rabbi to serve in Bevis Marks, right, when it was built in 1701. And he was also known as being an astrologer and being interested in science and philosophy, also from Italy. He's born in Venice, lived in Livorno as well. So again, also from the Spanish and Portuguese tradition. And what I actually think you see over here is perhaps a sense of connection of where Rabbi Sacks ultimately kind of where his spiritual roots were, right, were from this way of thinking that you find that's been in the Spanish and Portuguese community for a very long time, which doesn't see contradiction, between orthodoxy in the world, but actually just sees that this is what it means to be a Jew. This is what it means to be an Orthodox Jew, a traditional Jew, is that you live as a Jew and you're part of the world, and you value what your difference, and that you have a unique way to live, but you also equally embrace the world and learn from the world and see what else the world has to contribute. I think that very much ultimately was the ideology that Rabbi Sacks embraced. We saw in that first lecture that he said if he could, he would have converted to be Sephardi, right? I think there's something about that sense where there's just a comfort with these two things. These things are not in opposition. In fact, these things very much live together. And so I think that's, for Rabbi Sacks, when he grappled with the meaning of chosen people, he was trying to find a way to appreciate what makes us proud to be Jews, about why it's important that we continue to be different, to be Jews, but then to use that as an argument for saying that Judaism believes in the idea of difference, right? That Judaism believes in the idea of diversity, right? That actually is the whole purpose of the chosen people, is to teach the world that we don't all have to be the same, right? To teach the world that we should have diversity in it. And that is an amazing contribution to Jewish thought, because what he's done is furnished Judaism with the ability to be proudly Jewish, but at the same time to be truly accepting and tolerant and welcoming to diversity and difference, to appreciate what other societies have to offer. And as a Jew, you don't have to feel bad the fact that you like Shakespeare, or that you enjoy art or whatever. Meaning, why not? Each society has contributed something beautiful to the world. We've contributed our bit, they've contributed their bit, but God is bigger than all of us. And ultimately, hopefully we all get to where God goes, but we each have our own way of getting there. And that's something which is really great. And so again, we kind of see that there's this kind of ideology that's running through many of Rabbi Sacks's writing about the way that he sees the kind of this holistic approach to the world, to the place of Jews in the world, to the relationship to God, and that ultimately there's all these kind of pieces to it, but they're actually part of one whole that I think together created a worldview of Rabbi Sacks. And I don't know if anywhere he kind of just wrote out, this is my worldview in this way. Perhaps in some of his writings, he was attempting to do that. But I think if you kind of start pulling together all the strands, you realize what he was doing, that he really was creating a worldview, which was rooted in traditional Judaism, but just kind of taking it a bit further, giving it language that really made it fit into the Western world, that would allow Jewish people to be proud of being Jewish, while also being proud of what Judaism has to offer, but also being proud that Judaism is a religion that embraces or recognizes other people, diversity and tolerance, and that in fact being religious doesn't make you fundamentalist, it doesn't make you crazy, it actually allows you to advance the causes of tolerance and diversity. That's actually the mission of Jews, is to advance diversity and tolerance. It's really kind of a compelling way of thinking about Judaism and the world. And I don't think anybody ever quite formulated it to the extent or to the way that Rabbi Sacks did, as we saw, and as he, I think, himself appreciated, and I think is really one of the great legacies that he's left us. Maybe I'll take a pause here if anybody has any questions before we just wrap it up for tonight. If anybody has, just raise your hand. Okay, so in that case, next week we're going to conclude this series on Jewish faith. We're going to be looking at the subject of the living law, and we're going to talk a little bit about the subject of Jewish law and halakha, and the way that Rabbi Sacks saw its function and its purpose and its value. And so that's a sensitive topic, which we will look into a bit more next week. But a pleasure studying with all of you. I hope you enjoyed. And again, whether or not this is ultimately an ideology that resonates with you or not, that's for every person to ultimately work through themselves. But I hope at the very least you came to understand what Rabbi Sacks was attempting to do and why he was attempting to do that.
Super. Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
an
much.
excellent overview.
Thank you, Rabbi Morris.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Wonderful to see
Maybe
everyone.
our next Rabbi Sacks
Bye.
is fantastic.
Michael Yadkin is the father. Yeah.